Hello everybody, and welcome to this workshop on effective group work in Zoom for science. My name is Chris Meyer, hybrid teacher coach for the TDSB, and this is the third in my series of workshops all about using Zoom for science teaching. The goals of this short session is to share with you some tips on effective online group work, some tips for using Zoom itself, and to simulate a science activity so you see what it looks like in practice. Now, this is the third of my webinars using Zoom, so I encourage you to take a look at the previous ones if you would like some more background information, because I'll be assuming that you are comfortable using Zoom and you're good with its basic controls. So let's jump right into things. I always like to remind people that when you're using Zoom and setting things up, it's really helpful to do that on a laptop or a desktop using Windows or a Mac iOS system. That gives you the most functionality. If you are using something like a Chromebook, a tablet, or even a phone, there'll be fewer functions and they will be harder to find. So, as a device for yourself and your teachers, and your students, always use a laptop or a desktop whenever you can for the Zoom sessions. Also, in order to have our effective groups working later on, we will need to have the chat and screen sharing features enabled. Now, there are some challenges that go with group work. And no matter what format you're using, in person or online, these challenges hold true. So you have the situations where there's very little collaboration taking place within those groups. So essentially one student does all the work. Another problem with group work is you have that standoff that often happens near the beginning where everybody's waiting for somebody else to make the first move. And so the group work takes a long time to get started. Now, in an online environment, there are some particular and unique challenges. And most importantly, there are fewer visual cues. So we can't read one another's facial expressions very easily. It's hard to tell what the other people in your group are actively doing at any moment in time. And when you're trying to share your ideas or your work, you're doing a lot of describing rather than just being able to point at things and show people what you're working on. And then we have the good old standoff. So in general, here are some strategies for effective group work, no matter what format you're working in. So always assign clear roles or responsibilities to the group members. This can be done in a very simple and quick way, or you can provide more elaborate training for your students. Provide careful instructions for what the groups are supposed to do. That way, your time is not constantly being taken up by students asking the same question over and over again, or in the online environment, you're not constantly going from one breakout room to another to provide that same instruction that you just happen to forget or leave out. It's really important to help students see what one another is doing online. So the use of cameras is really, really helpful. Those visual cues are very important. So we want to encourage our students as much as possible to work together with their cameras on in their collaborative groups. Now, as a teacher, it's really important to create situations that require collaboration. If your tasks are very simple or straightforward, require little discussion, then students will default to just quickly completing the task essentially on their own. So the nature of the tasks you provide them can make a big difference. And the final thing is to ensure that there is a level of accountability. And what that means is an accountability that each student is doing work within the groups. Personally, I like to have students submit handwritten work every time we have them work in class. And so that involves writing something up, scanning it, and submitting it. Now, you can go for a simpler strategy of having students work in a Google Doc or submit some sort of online product. But personally, I enjoy the handwritten one because it's harder to copy. You can't just easily cut and paste and send it off to a friend. It encourages more careful individual work alongside the group work itself. Now, for group roles, this is what I suggest you follow. And you can train students carefully in these roles or just give them very quick and simple instructions to get them going quickly. You have a manager who organizes things, recorder who writes things in the virtual format, the speaker whose job it is to talk to the teacher or the class, and then the reader who reads out the instructions. So it's time for a science activity. To prepare our students for that, we want to give careful instructions before we send them into their breakout rooms. Especially with Zoom, your ability to send instructions into the breakout rooms all at once is very limited, and so do a careful job of that beforehand. Another helpful thing to do as part of those instructions is to show students what the controls in the Zoom software look like. This is particularly challenging because they look different from what we see as teachers, as the hosts in the Zoom software. So here are some examples of how you might do that. One of the things we want our students to do while they are working together is to share the screen with one another. And so it's helpful for you as the teacher to show screen captures of these controls within Zoom. So we can show the green button at the bottom of the screen that says share screen, and we show that they have to select the browser window that they'll be working on, for example. So if you are sharing a screen and working in a collaborative group, you want to be able to visually see your other group members. And so depending on how you have your Zoom set up, you'll have a floating window showing thumbnails of the different people in your group, but sometimes not everybody appears. So it's helpful to choose the thumbnail option. I'm moving that window right now. It's helpful to choose the thumbnail option that allows the full list of group members to appear. So that helps you to see everybody while you are continuing your work in your breakout groups. If you're watching somebody else's shared screen, then again, you want to make sure that you're able to see everybody. And so if that's not automatically available, there's the view option in the top right corner of the screen. And then you can choose the mode that you would like to use. So use the side-by-side gallery, and that way it lists and shows a thumbnail for each person in your group. So I'm doing all of this, I'm sharing all of this with you as screen captures that I've made, because as the host and using Zoom, I can't share with you my screen and show you the different control windows that pop up through Zoom. Those don't go through in the system. And so you have to make screen captures to show students what these controls look like. One of the challenges is these controls will look different for the student than they will for you. They look different for the participant in the Zoom meeting than they do for the host. So here's an example of that. If you're a host, you will never see this appear. You're viewing somebody else's screen. And at the top, there's a selection called View Options. So here we're introducing the Annotation Tool to our students. And to select that, they have to find this View Options control, select Annotate, and then they'll be able to draw on the shared screen. And then here's a quick look at what that might look like. So you choose the text feature from the Annotate options, and then you can start writing and drawing on the shared screen. So that's an example of how you can show your students how to use the tools within Zoom. It is annoying because you have to make these screen captures. You can't just easily share a screen and show them where these controls are. But once you do that, once you train them, then they're off to the races. Another final trick that we use is taking a screenshot of what you're working on. And so in Windows, there's a trick for that. Hold down the window button and select print screen. And if you're using a Mac, then use the Command-Shift-3 key sequence. Okay, so I was mentioning it was time for a science activity. So here are the instructions that I'm going to give to my students. And off and away we go. So I'm going to click on that. And so that you could just paste in the chat of your Zoom, and the students will be able to track that down. Okay, so here are these instructions. So in our task today, we are going to be using a simulation, and I provided the link for that right in the instructions. So the manager is going to open the simulation. So right now I have 2 people in my group, the way that I've set up my work for this webinar. So let's see, there we go. There's the other group member. And I've labeled the 2 group members, the recorder and the manager. So I'm just running a second computer over at the side here. So what the manager is going to do is open up the simulation. Okay, so the manager has these same instructions. They click on that link to bring up the simulation. And now the manager is going to share their screen. So here we go. Okay, so that should be coming up now. All right. Now, if we had a reader in our group, the reader would be going through our instructions here and reading these out loud to us. And that way people can focus their attention on different parts of our task here. So one of the things that we're doing is we're saying to the manager, okay, you have the simulator, but you're controlling it, but you're not deciding what to do with it. We want the input of the rest of the group. We want to get everybody involved in discussing what we should be doing in order to complete the tasks that we have laid out. And then here are the instructions for everybody else. So we want to instruct the manager what to do using the simulator. We're going to discuss these following questions. With my own students, I really like them recording their own responses. I usually have separate handwritten sheets that they're going to be using. And that's something you can decide whether or not you want to do. If it's a quick group work task, then you might not worry about that at all. And as you'll see later on, there's a group product that they'll be submitting. So we have a few questions to look at, and we're going to just quickly go through that together. So let's switch back to our Zoom meeting window. Okay, so we would be giving our manager instructions on what to do. So the manager is working over here, using the balloon, rubbing it against the sweater, and then bringing it toward the wall there. Okay, and now I'm just going to skip through some of our questions there and get to the annotation part. So I am currently performing the role of the recorder. So on my screen, it says you are viewing manager's screen. And so I'm going to use the view options, select annotate, and now the annotation controls come up. So our goal here is to explain what's happening in this situation. And I'm not going to do all of the work. I'll just give you a quick look at what it's like to use these tools. So for example, I might use this text tool to describe what's happening with the balloon. The balloon has a net negative charge. And some controls to the text box there. Position that right there. Fix the spelling mistake. And voila, net negative charge. And it even shows who included that annotation. Now, once that annotation is done, I can't move it around very easily. I could use the drawing tool to draw some arrows that point things out. That's not especially helpful in this context, but just showing you how we're using the tools. So the students would go through this and complete their answers to the questions that we asked. And once they're ready, it's time to submit your work. And we've asked them to do that using the screen capture or screenshot feature. So I'm holding down the Windows key and pressing print screen. So my screen kind of flashes a little bit. And that means it has saved it to my computer, but also to my clipboard. And now what I can do is I can go to the instructions here, and it says recorder. This is what we just did. And now we want to paste this response into this submission document. So what we see in this document is a slot for each of the groups in my class to submit this screenshot of their work showing their explanation. And let's say I'm group A1. I'll just do a Control V for a paste. And it should pop in there. Okay, and there we go. And then I can very quickly, so just at a glance, I can see the work that has been submitted by the different groups. Now, once the task is done, we might call the class back. We might finish the breakout rooms, we call the class back, and then we'd have a discussion. So I could choose one of the submitted screenshots and ask a group to explain what they did, or ask the class some follow-up questions. So having that submission document is a great way to see at a glance what all the groups have accomplished. Now, in a situation like this, where we're using a simulator, I really want all the students to have a chance to use the simulator. So in the follow-up instructions, because this was just a very short task that I was sharing with you, there'd be other instructions that say, okay, now that your group has done this, take 5 minutes and individually use the simulator to perform these tasks. Because I think it's really important that everybody has these experiences. So this is a very important theme, or a very important strategy for how to work effectively with groups online. And the important idea here is we have one person who's sharing the interactive element with the rest of the group. And the process is set up to encourage discussions amongst the group members, and different roles assigned in order to help students and to help the group complete different elements of the task. So if we did this without the screen sharing feature, we just said, okay, you're working in your groups, but everybody's going to open up the simulator and try it out themselves. Students will be focused on what's in front of them. There will be very little discussion, and in a sense, very little effective group work. And it's often in those discussions when students do the learning, where they figure out, oh, that's actually different from what I was understanding before. And so having that one common thing to focus on and to look at is really helpful when you're attempting online group work. Otherwise, they're kind of working independently, just side by side in groups. And there's times when that can be fine, but there's other times where we want them to have rich and interesting discussions. And especially in science, we're often looking at things, making observations, or doing quasi-experiments like this, where we want to think about what's happening and explain what we see. And often in those cases, this type of collaboration, where we have one person sharing the interactive element, is the most effective. Okay, so there was our science activity, and that wraps up this session here. So I hope that gave you some good hints on how to have your groups working effectively online. So if you're looking for my various science resources, you can find them at the first link. This presentation is available at the second link. And if you're looking for a really thorough introduction by the folks at Zoom, you can try out that third link there. Oh, good luck, everybody, and happy science teaching.